Listen, I want to give y'all a hot update in what's going on in the city of Oakland, California, and this is happening all over the country. But right now, in the citizens in my city, last night, the Oakland Unified School Department closed down 10 schools. They voted to close down 10 schools out of a potential 16 schools. Now, let me tell y'all how this affects the whole community. What's happening is they're closing down a lot of the schools in East Oakland. They closed down some of the schools, and they're using like test scores, or they're using attendance rates and things of that nature to be the reason why they initiate this initiative to close these schools down. But let me give you a little bit more further details on how this affects us all. In closing those schools, they're merging a couple, and then they're closing the majority of those schools. The parents only have 5 days to pick a new school for their children to go to. Now, some of these parents have multiple children. And having multiple children, we have to understand transportation. Some of these people lack transportation. They lack the mobility. They lack the finance to get these kids to go to schools that may be on the other side of town. So here it is. Now there are no bus passes. None of these things are being issued out. There's nothing that can compensate these children or these parents to get their kids to these schools. What that does is that makes these children say, okay, we're going to do, let's say, home studies or the truancy and things like that. Now, that's going to go up. The truancy is going to go up. Now, in return, and I don't know where it's like in other states, but in California, parents can go to jail for not sending their children to school. So we look at that. We look at the CPS, protective custody, can come in and take some of the children. We can look at the end of the day, the biggest thing that I'm looking at is the prison pipeline and how this continues to develop in the prison pipeline in our communities and our schools, which raises the poverty, which raises the jail rate, which raises from, like I say, incarceration. And then once incarceration happens, there's no rehabilitation. And then recidivism is the constant of those going back and forth to jail. So now we're dealing with that. Also, we're also dealing with the gang violence in the city, where these kids can't go to schools in certain areas because of the gang rivalries, which plays a major component in people and some of the kids saying, man, I'm not going to that school because I don't feel safe. Then you have to look at the fact of them not being able to get to these schools. Then you look at the segregation. Now, here's another key component: the racial segregation of what's happening to our black and brown children. They're not doing these in other communities of where the black and brown population is at a high. You don't see any schools closing in Piedmont. You don't see any schools closing in Montclair. You don't see any schools closing in areas that is not so low income. More of the reason why they're churning this prison pipeline to get our kids, our young boys, our young girls, and forcing them into the streets. As they're forcing them to the streets, that racial divide, the segregation, the gang rivalry, and all of these things, now more children are locked up in these streets. More children are stuck in these streets with nothing to do. There's a lack of opportunity. The employment rate for these young kids, they don't have opportunities to go get jobs. They don't have the opportunity for schools. They don't have anything. The only thing that they're going to do is be forced in a situation that makes them go survive. In that, they're going to do, the rate is going to go up. There's going to be more bipping. There's going to be more robbery. It's going to be more home invasions. It's going to be more of these things, because you can't address the secondary until you address the primary. And the primary is, if we're taking all the opportunity away from these children, if we're closing these schools, if we're sending them to the streets, what options there's no other options but them for it to go to the streets. That's why it's imperative that people from my generation, we get more involved in our city politics. We get more involved in our local boards, our school officials, so we can know what's going on, especially if you're a parent and you have children that are in these Oakland Unified schools, and you can see what's going on. There are people that are losing jobs. There are teachers that aren't being paid. There's so much going on. As well as to the other activists, we have to stop judging each other on what we do, or judging the transgressions, and say, let's set aside our differences. And long as we fight the common battle of saying we all have the same sentiments towards our children, towards the opportunities or the lack of opportunities, and let's come together to begin to amplify the activism so the awareness can be spread. So when they have measures like this where we say we can vote collectively, we can create and galvanize and organize several individuals to go out to those, to get to these polls, to start voting, so they can't slide these things under our noses. Because how is it that you can put a $30 million budget to give crack pipes to the streets, but we can't use a $10 million budget to keep schools up and pay these teachers? I just want to give y'all an update, and I feel like it's my responsibility to raise more of the awareness for those that aren't aware of what's going on with our children in our communities, and to cities that are over and over. If you get a chance to see what's happening here, this is the genesis of what's going on. The main reason is so they can implement charter schools. And charter schools, they don't have to allow all of these kids to come, and they're selective of who they allow in, and it's all based off culturally biased test scores, which will directly affect your kids and my kids, because most of the things that are if they're not passing these high test scores, they can choose and opt out to not allow these kids into those schools. More kids in the streets, more kids going to prison. The prison pipeline continues to keep going. The same people that fund these charter schools are the same people that are funding these private prisons. More incarceration rates for our children. Let's wake up, people. Spread the word. Let's go.